Hi everyone. One question I get asked all the time on my videos is why certain types of Melbourne train only operate on certain lines, usually in the context of, why does my line get all the old trains while other lines get all the nice ones? In this video, I'm going to go through why the four current types of Melbourne suburban train run in the places they do, then we'll have a bit of a look at what that actually means for passengers. First of all, let's look at how the trains are divided up at the moment in 2023. The four current types of suburban electric train used on the network are, from oldest to newest, the ComEng trains. These first entered service in 1981 and have two distinct appearances based on which company refurbished them back in the early 2000s. The Extrapolis trains, built by Alstom and running in Melbourne since 2002, but built in several batches right up till 2020, so some of them aren't that old. The Siemens trains from 2003, and the high capacity metro trains, or HCMT, which began revenue service at the end of 2020. If you want a rundown of all the types of electric train used in Melbourne since 1919, it just so happens I've made a video about that too. The entirety of the Clifton Hill and Burnley groups of lines, so that's everything from Mernda right around to Glen Waverley, are 100% operated by Extrapolis trains. The Cranbourne and Pakenham lines are operated entirely by HCMTs. The northern group, that's Sunbury, Craigieburn and Upfield, is operated by the ComEng fleet, and also the Siemens trains. The Sandringham line is also operated by those two types. Lastly, the cross-city group, made up of the Frankston, Werribee and Williamstown lines, gets the most variety, with ComEng, Siemens and Extrapolis trains all running the service. On lines with a mixture of trains, the different types aren't generally rostered on specific services, so even if you travel at the same time each day, you will effectively get a random selection when it comes to train type. I should also quickly mention the two odd lines out. The Flemington Racecourse line, which only operates for special events, can be run by any type except the HCMT. And the Stony Point line, which runs as a shuttle from Frankston, is not electrified, so uses Sprinter diesel railcars hired from V-Line. Now let's look at the reasoning behind why the trains are distributed the way they are. Well, up until the early 2000s, as a general rule, all types of trains were able to run on all lines, giving a huge amount of flexibility. The sectorisation of train types began in the early privatisation era when the rail network was foolishly split in two and handed to separate operators known as Hillside and Bayside, later Connex and M-Train. Connex and M-Train put out separate tenders for new trains, with Connex ordering the Extrapolis sets from Alstom and M-Train getting the Siemens trains from Siemens. New trains have to be approved to run on each line individually, and sometimes modifications need to be made to infrastructure or signalling. So the Extrapolis trains were only approved to run on Connex's side of the network, often called the north side, while the Siemens were approved only to run on the south side. And yeah, the south side includes the northern group, just try not to think about it. I should mention some trains are allowed to run outside their normal areas for testing or to access maintenance facilities. For instance, Siemens trains have run to Epping workshops in the past, and Extrapolis trains sometimes visit Craigieburn workshops, but this is always done empty, not carrying passengers. So eventually the network was stuck back together, but there was no pressing need to approve each new train type to operate system-wide, so they stayed on their split-era routes. But the government then chose to continue ordering more and more and more and more X-Traps, and eventually there was enough of them to completely saturate the lines they were approved for, which forced out the ComEngers to the other side of the network. The ComEngers are still approved to run system-wide, but no longer appear in the north on a regular basis. As even more X-Traps were delivered, it became necessary to approve them for operation on more lines. This initially happened in 2014 on the Frankston line, which was a highly political move as the line runs through a number of marginal electorates which were considered crucial to that year's state election. And a big deal was made of bringing in a new type of 10-year-old train on the line at the time, even though initially only a single Extrapolis was rostered on the line each day. A few years later, it was decided to start through running between the Frankston line and the Werribee-Williamstown lines, so the X-Traps were approved to run over that way as well. Then at the end of 2020, the HCMTs were introduced. They were specifically ordered for operation through the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, which is still under construction, but once finished will carry the Pakenham and Cranbourne lines through running with Sunbury. While we wait for the tunnel to be finished, the HCMTs are running on one half of their future territory, the southeast side. This made sense as those lines can operate fully self-contained, whereas trains on the Sunbury line are timetabled to run a mixture of services on other Northern Group lines, so work would have had to be done to approve HCMTs for lines they won't actually use in the future. It's worth noting that once the through running begins, HCMTs will no longer run around the city loop on a regular basis, so it will become unusual to see them at the 5 current CBD stations. Okay, so that gives us the current distribution, but what does this actually mean for passengers? A lot of people who live on lines with older trains tend to feel like they're getting a bad deal, but that's overly simplistic and doesn't look at what features are objectively beneficial to passengers, or otherwise. While older trains tend to be less mechanically reliable, a complete breakdown in service is still very unlikely, so it's not something that affects passengers on a daily basis. Whereas things like internal design elements and passenger information systems are things that passengers experience every single trip. So let's look at a brief comparison between two types that illustrate this. The extrapolis trains vary in age from about 3 years to just over 20 years and are generally considered by the public to be pretty modern. They are very reliable, however, they are a cheap design and have a lot of issues that affect passenger comfort. Their suspension is shocking, giving a really rough ride. They have poor traction control in wet conditions, causing the whole train to shudder when braking or accelerating in the rain. The air conditioning vents are angled towards the wall, often making the window seats uncomfortably cold and drafty. There's a handrail which blocks the view of the passenger information screen from a good part of the carriage, and they have this special seat where your knees block the exit from the driver's cab. Then we have the ComEng fleet, which were built throughout the 1980s, so the oldest sets are now entering their early 40s. While their age is starting to show in terms of reliability, the ComEng was designed and built specifically for Melbourne, and built right here in Dandenong. They have airbag suspension, which gives a nice smooth ride, nice big windows, and a windowsill that's wide enough to use as an armrest, which might seem like a minor detail, but I find it really adds to the comfort of the journey. Their seating layout has been changed a lot over the years, but I think the current setup is really good, probably the best in the fleet, with blocks of 2+3 seating and plenty of space in between for standees. The ComEng sets still in service today have also received a life extension refurbishment, meaning many of the internal fittings such as the seat fabric are not old at all. Most sets have also had the internal displays recently replaced with this modern type that shows lots of information including the line map, whereas the extrapolis sets, even the ones that are only a few years old, still have these very basic dot matrix displays, if you can even see them. Also, ComEng's just sound really cool. I commute on a line run entirely by X-Traps, and I'd happily trade a small percentage of reliability for a more comfortable ride on a ComEng every day. Meanwhile, the Siemens and HCMTs both feature seats with high backs, although the padding is almost non-existent, so they're still quite uncomfortable. Both also feature open gangways between cars, and windows that are slightly too high up. The bottom of the glass is about shoulder height on an average adult. Both these trains do ride very well and are very quiet, and the HCMTs have a lot of additional passenger information screens and extra space for prams, bikes and wheelchairs. I should mention that people who actually work on the trains, especially drivers and those who maintain them, will have their own reasons for preferring one type over another, but I'm really just looking at the passenger perspective here. So there are specific reasons to the way the trains are divided up, and while there are pros and cons to every type, I think it's important to look beyond a train's age when judging its value to the public. The fact that we have older trains in service at all means we're getting good value out of them. It's extremely wasteful to withdraw trains before their maximum practical lifespan has come to an end. Thanks for watching.